Isolated on a remote Norwegian farm, 4 people would find themselves the targets of a murderer determined to eliminate them, one by one. It was November 1842, on a farm called Osterelva, or the Eastern River Farm, nestled in a valley on the island of Vardo. The owners, Ellen and Ole, lived a quiet life there. Tragedy had already shadowed their lives. Their first 2 children had died just days after their births, and now Ellen was 7 months pregnant with her 3rd child. Also living on the farm was a young boy, Anders, just 12 years old, whom Ellen and Ole had taken under their care. The 23rd of November seemed like any other cold, uneventful day until a familiar visitor arrived. Peter Larsen Siedfjorskar was an old friend, a young Sami fisherman with poor hearing and a limp caused by one leg being shorter than the other. He asked about renting a room on the farm together with his wife, eager to leave his parents' home behind. They agreed to talk it over, and as the day wore on, Peter also asked Ole for help with some fishing work. Ole promised to assist him in a few days. Peter stayed the night on their farm. The following day, he seemed ill and kept mostly to himself, exchanging a few quiet words with Ellen about some favors. The day passed uneventfully, and when evening came, the household prepared for bed. Ellen, due to her pregnancy, slept in her own bed, while Ole, Peter, and Anders shared another. The house fell silent, its only light coming from the faint glow of moonlight slipping through the small window. But in the dead of night, the quiet was shattered. Ole screamed, a sound so raw and full of terror that it jolted everyone awake. Ellen, panicked and clutching her swollen stomach, began shouting for Peter to light a candle. The chaos revealed a horrifying truth. Both Ole and Ellen had been stabbed in the darkness by an unknown assailant. But Peter hesitated. He was paralyzed with fear, certain that if he lit the candle, he'd be the next to feel the blade. The room was a void of pitch black, broken only by faint silver moonlight from the window, a light too dim to reveal the danger that surrounded them. In the confusion, young Anders sprang into action. The boy darted into the living room, desperate to find whoever was trying to kill them. When nothing revealed itself, he ran outside into the freezing night, shouting into the darkness. Inside, Ellen, pregnant and bleeding from a stab wound to her stomach, pleaded with Peter to help the boy. Reluctantly, Peter ventured out into the bitter cold. What he found outside stopped him in his tracks. Anders lay crumpled in the snow, motionless, blood pooling around his small body. Heart pounding, Peter rushed back inside, his voice shaking as he told Ellen and Ole that Anders was dead. But Ellen, despite her injuries, wouldn't let the boy be abandoned to the frozen wilderness. She begged Peter to bring Anders' body back inside. Bracing himself, Peter returned to the snow-covered yard. As he lifted the lifeless boy in his arms, something impossible happened. Anders stirred, his eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. Stunned, Peter carried the boy back inside, placing him gently on the bed beside Ole, who was barely holding on. The farmhouse was now filled with the haunting sound of labored breaths, the darkness cloaking them all in fear as they awaited the next strike. Peter finally mustered the courage to light a candle, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows across the blood-smeared room. As the dim light illuminated the horrors before him, the grim reality of their situation became undeniable. Ole was hunched over, his trembling hands slick with blood. Ellen, pale and clutching her stomach, had been stabbed just below her ribs. Young Anders, still barely conscious, lay beside them, his small frame racked with pain. Peter, though shaken to his core, did what he could to tend to their wounds, his hands unsteady as he worked in the faint light. Every breath felt heavier, the silence of the night outside pressing down on them. When his makeshift aid was done, he extinguished the candle, plunging the room back into suffocating darkness. Ellen spoke up. "Peter, you have to go for help," she said. There was no alternative. Their survival depended on him. They fashioned a makeshift torch, its flame barely steady in Peter's grasp, and pushed him toward the door. As soon as Peter stepped outside, the cold night swallowed him. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered. Maybe he could find someone. Maybe they would make it through this nightmare. But that hope was brutally extinguished. A piercing scream cut through the night, followed by a sickening crash as something heavy slammed against the door. Inside, the 3 injured survivors froze in terror. Peter, their last chance at rescue, was gone. But their ordeal was far from over. The flickering light from the torch left behind began licking at the wooden walls of the house, sparks growing into flames. Ellen, through her pain, saw the fire spreading. Panic set in. The farm was going to burn, and if they stayed, they would all die. She pushed herself up, staggering toward the main door. But when she tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The door was blocked. Whoever had attacked them had ensured there was no way out. Smoke began to fill the room, stinging their eyes and clogging their lungs. Ellen's gaze darted around desperately. That's when she spotted it, the smoke hole in the ceiling. Ellen stumbled to her feet, desperate to reach the smoke hole above. But when she looked up, her heart sank into a cold abyss. A massive rock had been placed over it, blocking their only route of escape. Panic seized her. Not only were they trapped, but the smoke from the fire had nowhere to escape. It thickened in the air, choking the room as flames devoured everything around them. Their time was running out. Ellen's gaze darted to the house's only window. It was painfully small, so small that even a teenager couldn't squeeze through it, but it was the only option left. Determined, she shattered the glass with trembling hands. Without hesitation, she pressed her body against the jagged frame. The shards bit into her flesh, tearing deep into her skin. The acrid smoke clawed at her throat and stung her eyes as she fought to force herself through the impossibly narrow opening. For a moment, it felt hopeless. And then, freedom. Ellen fell through, landing hard in the snow outside. The cold bit into her exposed, bloodied skin, but she barely noticed. Gasping for air, she staggered to her feet and screamed into the night for her husband. But there was no answer. Then she heard it, the agonized screams of young Anders, the 12-year-old boy. Ellen collapsed into the snow, helpless, her body trembling from shock and grief. Bloodied and broken, she crawled to the barn, her only sanctuary, and watched in horror as her home, her life, was reduced to ash before her eyes. As the house collapsed in a cacophony of crackling wood and roaring fire, Ellen's neighbors, alerted by the flames, arrived at the scene. Finding her unconscious, they pulled her from the snow and tended to her wounds. When Ellen finally regained consciousness, she recounted the horrific events to her rescuers. And as the pieces fell into place, the neighbors uncovered a chilling truth. Peter, their friend, the man who had come to visit, was alive. Not only alive, but uninjured. Worse yet, he had been spotted selling some of Ole and Ellen's possessions the day after the fire. Peter had come to the farm, intending to murder everyone there. He was hoping that through doing this, the property would become affordable for him to purchase, with or without the farmhouse. That night, Peter had gone to bed fully clothed, waiting for the others to drift into the vulnerable grip of sleep. When the moment came, he struck. He stabbed Ellen and Ola, trying to eliminate the 2 greatest threats. The stab wound Peter delivered to Ola wasn't immediately fatal, but it left him gravely injured, clutching his abdomen in agony. For Ellen, the blade had struck a spot just between her womb and chest. Miraculously, the unborn child she carried was unharmed. Anders, brave and desperate to find the attacker, had run outside, but there, in the icy darkness, Peter followed and dealt with him. When Ellen demanded he retrieve the boy's body, Peter begrudgingly returned outside, but as he reached for Anders, the boy stirred. Shocked, Peter carried him back inside and placed him next to Ole, perhaps realizing that his carefully constructed plan was already beginning to unravel. Ellen begged him to go find help. When he got outside into the bitter cold, Peter faked a blood-curdling scream and slammed his foot into the door with a loud thud, creating the illusion of his own demise. Then, in a final act of cruelty, he set the house ablaze. The fire consumed the home and its occupants, or so Peter thought, as he walked into the night, clutching the possessions he had stolen. 3 days later, Peter was seen fishing with his father. Seeking lodging, he approached a nearby farmer, but word of the murders had already spread. The farmer refused to give him shelter, referring to the murders. Peter asked if everyone died, to which the farmer replied, "Unfortunately for you, they weren't all killed." Now time was running out for Peter. It wasn't long before authorities caught up with him. Peter managed to escape custody once, but his freedom was short-lived. When he returned home, his own sister reported him to the authorities. In 1845, Peter was sentenced to be executed at the very site of his crimes. However, the fierce weather that plagued the region made it impossible to reach the farm. Frustrated, the authorities stopped in Kobelv instead, where, amidst a relentless storm, Peter met his end. But nature wasn't finished. On the return journey, the executioner fell into the icy waters. Though he survived the fall into the water, his health rapidly declined, and he died a few months later. On January 12, 1843, just weeks after losing her home and family, Ellen gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Ole Peter Andreas, carefully altering the spelling of Peter to distance her son from the man who had caused so much pain. Ellen eventually remarried, building a new life and having more children. Ole Peter Andreas grew up and lived to the age of 42 before passing away, though no cause of death was recorded. In the end, Ellen found the strength to rebuild and endure. A survivor in every sense of the word. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about this, my sources, as well as corrections, if any, will be in the video's description. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you feel I deserve it, you can click the like button or subscribe, and I hope you'll watch my next video as well.